Thank you for coming for the walking tour. If anyone didn't get a booklet, I have a few more here before you go out, but it should be about 45 minutes, plan on that. But your guide today is the historian here from the Old Forge area, Peg Masters, who wrote this booklet and did a lot of research to bring us up to date on the life of Gus Shepard, who designed this building. And as you know, 95 years ago, we were off by a day, but we couldn't help it, was the exact opening of the building here at Little Moose. So, thanks.
Okay, and thank you for inviting me. I must say that we did this tour about 5-6 weeks ago as a fundraiser, thanks to Skip, for the Town of Webb Historical Association. I welcome all the comments that you have and share your knowledge with me, if you will, on the tour. I'm going to start back at the very first lodge, which was built, does anyone recall? The first lodge?
Yeah, 1912.
No, actually it goes back quite a bit more than that, because the club was formed in 1890, and in 1892 they had the funds to build a lodge, raised about $20,000 to build it. What I'll do is I'll hand around a few historic photographs, and if you'll find Marion or Skip somewhere along the way, just hand it back to them. But this is a picture of that lodge. It was designed by an architect from Buffalo. His name was William S. Wicks. He was one of the early members of the club. He had already designed a few of the cottages over in Onondaga. He owned property over there. He was born in Barneville, New York. He was one of the first professionally trained architects in the United States. He studied both at Cornell and MIT. He designed buildings that I think are still extant at Cornell University. Absolutely gorgeous building. As I say, it cost about $20,000 to put this up. It was completed in 1893. There's a photograph of it on the back. Of course, it was a wooden structure. Yeah, burn, baby, burn. You're right. And just this week I did find, I don't want to leave him out of this history tour, I did find an 1877 photograph of William S. Wicks. He partnered with a man by the name of Edward Green. The architectural plans for that building actually had Green and Wicks' name on it, but we're pretty sure that Wicks was the primary architect for it. He also, in his tenure here, designed the original guides building. And the core of that building, according to Ted Comstock, is still a Wicks building. That's about all that's over here on the Little Moose campus that dates back to Wicks' day. There's another photograph of him later on in life. In 1889, he published a book called Log Cabins, How to Build and Furnish Them. Some of you maybe have a copy of this. It's still available in reprint today. I just checked some prices as I put the museum in Blue Mountain. Yesterday, $6.95, you can get a copy of that book. And many of those designs that were in that book, he incorporated in some of the camp designs that he later built here, both at Onondaga and Bisbee. He did build the original boathouse here that was torn down in 1912 and replaced. And sad to say, well, I should say too, Miles Barse, B-A-R-S-E, I believe, was one of the founding members of the Adirondack League Club. He was from the Buffalo area, and Wicks designed his home for him there. Wicks' home is still there, existing in Buffalo today.
Where is it? Because I was from Buffalo.
It's at 124 Jewett Parkway. There's a whole neighborhood, and if you go online and you search for Wicks, you're going to find quite a bit of stuff on him.
Okay, thank you.
His obituary is on the back, and he died in 1919. Now, it is true, wooden structure, it's very difficult to keep them. It's amazing when we have a building that's over 100 years old here in the Adirondacks. And sad to say, in April of 1913, there was a fire here. The caretaker was here at the time. I'm a member of the Old Forge Fire Department. I've been a member for about 19 years. I'm a Monday night EMT. If you ever need an EMT, I'll be the one to come. But in any case, a couple years ago, I did the 100th anniversary of history of the Old Forge Fire Department. So they came here. They came by boat to the landing on First Lake. Some of the men, 60-some men, showed up in April of 1913 to try to save that original building. They came up the road, which was built in about 1909, I think 1895. There was a road from Old Forge Village up here to Little Moose. It was in 1895, President Benjamin Harrison was a visitor here for several times.
I thought,
So he came in.
didn't his grandfather belong to this club? No? Benjamin Harrison's.
Benjamin Harrison, not that I know of.
William Henry Harrison, I thought was a member.
No, remember, he's the president that died after the 20,
Oh, yeah, that's true, but. that's
20
true.
days in office. He gave that huge
Well, Skip,
inaugural
as you
speech.
know, Skip Oswald's family has had the Tippecanoe, Tyler Tube.
Yeah, we're going to actually see that when we get down to the boathouse. That's great. No, I appreciate that. So this was in April of 1913 when that beautiful lodge was destroyed. At that time, they estimated the value to be, was it $50,000 to $70,000, which included the furnishings. 2 days later, the board met down in New York City. Now, they met to select an architect, and this time around they decided on Augustus D Shepard, Jr. And I was just saying to Skip a short time ago, there are several photographs of him around here on the campus. Do any of you know where they are?
One in my camp?
One in your camp?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, there's an extra dessert for anybody who spots them. And you have a Shepherd camp, I take it? Yeah.
There used to be one in the living room, but there seems to be one in the.
There's one in the east wing, and on the return from the boathouse, we'll come through there. But there's another couple of them, I think, on the tour. So there's an extra dessert for anybody who spots it. This is the only photograph that I found, and this was published in the 100th anniversary book for the Adirondack League Club, and he's in this beautiful guideboat at the time. He was born in 1868 in New Jersey. I'm not going to tell you a lot about his biographical information because that's in the little booklet that was handed to you. His father was a banker, a well-to-do banker. His name was Augustus Shepard Sr. They called him Gus. His brother was Elliot Shepard. Does anyone know that name at all?
Shepherd.
Elliot Shepard was married to Margaret Vanderbilt. She was the oldest daughter of William Henry Vanderbilt. She was the oldest sister of Lila Webb. And since I'm the historian from the town of Webb, I've done a lot of research over the last 10 years on Dr. Webb and his family. And so he was Dr. Webb's brother-in-law, Elliot Shepard. Elliot Shepard joined the club, I think, in about 1892. He wasn't a pioneer member, but he was one of the first members. On the back is a picture of Augustus Sr. His mother, Augustus Jr.'s mother, her name was Joanna Mead Rutherford. Joanna Rutherford Mead, I believe. Her brother was William Rutherford Mead from the McKin Mead White, famous architects out of New York City who did a lot of the architectural work, Newport, even out that way. New York City for the Vanderbilts and all of the wealthy families, of course, in that day. Stanford White was an early member of the club back in the early 1890s. He was a member of that firm. So we don't know too much about Augustus' early training, except that he went to school in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. They said he was trained privately and he studied abroad. But he certainly had talent in the family, architectural talent in the family. In the early 1890s, we know he came up here. By that time, in 1892, Dr. Webb's railroad connected from the Mohawk Valley, came right up to present-day Thendara, same station where it's located today. And then, of course, they would come down to the waterfront, come in either by boat to the landing, and eventually by 1895 there was a road, a buckboard transportation from Old Forge in here. In 1901, the family rented the Mallincroft camp. Augustus Sr., he had 4 siblings. The whole family came up that summer. And in 1902, we believe he got his first commission, and that was for the John Frawley camp, which I understand has burned. Somewhere adjacent to the clubhouse, main clubhouse here. It had 30 rooms. It wasn't exactly a modest little camp. There's a photograph, an architectural photograph. I think this was in the Centennial book as well. His chief contractor was a man by the name of George Goodsell. And George Goodsell was his right arm, a local man. He started originally as a stagecoach driver for Dr. Webb when they were building the railroad in 1891, 1892. He built a house on Main Street, which is right directly across from the post office. It's today the Town of Webb Historical Association. George died in 1924, and then his son Robert also helped build camps and was a caretaker here. Robert lived to be 100 years old. He died in 2004. And he's the one that donated that building, that family home, to the Town of Webb Historical Association. So if you haven't been down to our museum, please come. We got lots of folders and stuff on the League Club. So here's the design for the 1914. It's a very poor picture of the lodge, Mountain Lodge, that Shepard built. I do want to point out that there's some architectural decision made. To tear down the wing. Oh, I'm sorry, back in '68, somewhere around there. There was a decision to tear down that wing on the far side. Part of the veranda, I think, was extended to enlarge the dining room. What was taken out? Does anyone remember? The children's dining room, servants' quarters.
We used to play in there.
Yeah. So it was a much larger building than you find here today. If you have any questions, let me know. We're going to head up to the winter house now, the guide's house. Of course, the ALC put Old Forge on the map. Let's face it, 1890. This gave permanent employment to people. Prior to that, they were just seasonal. They pretty much left during the winter months. But this now provided year-round jobs for people as caretakers and cooks and guides and carpenters and you name it. And of course, 1892, the capstone was the railroad coming. So I just love the vintage pictures, and one of them that I was going to show you is the picture of the vegetable garden. You know, we got to have fresh vegetables, right? And this picture, I think, might have been in the Centennial book, but that was located, from what I understand, back here in this open space. There was also a stable. The first car came here in 1907, but, you know, they still had to have stables and barns and that type of thing. There was a 6-hole golf course here at one time that was in this open area in the back. And in case, I don't think I mentioned it, Wicks was paid some $500 for the design of the first lodge, Mountain Lodge. Shepard was paid in 1913 $1,500, but it also included remodeling that, building the new ice house, and working out on a redesign, I think, of the boathouse. And also, he helped design this beautiful tennis court that's been here since 1908, around 1908, from what I understand.
This one?
Yes. It was remodeled. It's been remodeled several times. I think the last time in 1989. It was built by subscription, which meant people who liked to play tennis forked over the money to build it. Were you telling me, or Ted was telling me, that this is perhaps the only wooden tennis court of this size? Playable wooden tennis court surviving here? Yeah, in the United States. So it's pretty incredible. And if you notice how it slopes, it's raised down on that other end. But Shepard was involved in the design of this as well. All right, over to Cottage 5, Cottage 6. Okay, I'm going to start. Did any of you know Dr. Charles Hendy Smith? The club doctor. I just think his story is so interesting. I'm going to take a few minutes to tell you about it. In 1907, he's camping up on Racket Lake, and he gets a call about a child that's injured or sick up on Bisbee. It took him 6 hours to make the house call. He went by train, Racket Lake Railroad train, to Clearwater. From Clearwater, he went down to McKeever. From McKeever, he came in, both boat and overland, to Bisbee to make that call. On his way back, the guides brought him down Big Little Moose Lake, and he took a look at this property, and he goes, what a beautiful place to bring children. He was a trained pediatrician out of New York City. He studied at Cornell University. He was born in 1877. They had 3 children. He and his wife had 3 children. The first child died young, as did Shepard's. The other 2 children, 2 boys I think, came here for over 30 years. He was the club physician. He talked to the board of directors in the winter of 1907-1908 and convinced them that he would be willing to come for free as long as he had accommodations to be the club doctor during the summer months. So the board gave him the 3rd floor over in Mountain Lodge that summer, and he thought the air was too stifling and not a healthy place for his children. So he insisted that he would be just as happy staying in tents. So the tents were put up, including one for the medical office, right here on this site later on in the summer of 1908. For 15 years, they stayed in the tents, he and his wife and his children. And just to give you an example, in 1909, there was an outbreak of smallpox here at the club, as well as in Old Forge. Dr. Hendy Smith traveled over 300 miles between Onondaga Bisbee and Little Moose vaccinating people. Anyone without a vaccination scar or proof of smallpox vaccination was asked to leave the club. In the 1920s, there was an outbreak of polio. There was actually a child here that died. According to the stories that he wrote for the centennial, he took out a number of stitches. I think the first year in 1908, he did an appendicitis surgery here on one of the club members. Finally, Mr. Mellencroft Sr. said, "It's time Mrs. Smith had a cottage." So again, by subscription in 1925, I think thereabouts, this cottage was built for Dr. Smith and his family. Here's a photograph of him. One of the things that, as a mother, we can all relate to, I think, when I found his obituary, he died in 1968. The headline noted him as the burping doctor. Not only was he a successful pediatrician, but he was the first doctor to insist that babies, after they're fed, should be held upright and that gas should be patted out of them. And so that was on his obituary, which I thought was kind of cute. He did die in 1968 in Princeton, New Jersey. He left his practice in New York, but he came here for a number of years. And his great love, of course, was painting. Not only that, apparently in his years here, he taught generations of club members' children to sail. He was very fond of sailing. So that was another one of his passions. This beautiful little cottage was Shepard designed. A couple of years before they did the office, and if you get a chance to ever go into Building 6, you can see in the midsection there was a pharmaceutical cabinets and things like that. The examining room was to the right on there. The waiting room was on the left of that. So that was the doctor's office up until, I think, the 50s. And this was Dr. Smith's family residence. It's got a lot of built-ins in here and a beautiful fireplace. I think this one is brick. Yeah, this one is brick. Shepard also did brick. In looking around at some of the cottages from Shepard's design, the majority of them were done out of native stone, but it wasn't uncommon for him to put brick into his. Shepard designed these 3 identical cottages in 1906. They were 2 stories. Hello, Boochie Booch. They were 2 stories, included a kitchen. The only complaint the club members had is they wished there was a back staircase for the servants. And apparently he promised in 1907 that he would add the second staircase, but from what I understand, they were never put in. There's no second staircase?
No, there is not.
No, so that never happened. Eat in the dining room, leave the servants home. So there is one cottage open. If you want to take a quick peek in on the way down to the boathouse, our final little chat's going to be at the boathouse. Okay? So here we are in the 1912 Shepard designed boathouse. The Wicks one was torn down that year and replaced. It has been altered a couple of times, but this is such a beautiful example of the simplicity of Shepard's work, especially the later work. You may have noticed a lot more decorative design on the Frawley camp, and as you look at the progression of his designs, he incorporated everything so that it meshed with nature. Wicks had a tendency to elevate his camps, where Shepard would excavate into the landscape and build retaining walls and sidewalks, and he was very concerned about even the interiors and how they were furnished. From what I understand, in the old days, this was used for social events and dances and church. Until finally there was only like 3 or 4 people coming, so church was abandoned. By the way, in 1895, ex-President Benjamin Harrison, who had bought 37 acres on the point between First Lake and Second Lake and built a cottage there that still exists, he was here for church, singing lustily, from what I understand, and a guest several times here at the club. He died in 1901. I'll tell you a little bit more when we get downstairs about him, because one of his guidebooks is still here. What else can I tell you about this? I just want to catch you up because a couple of people have been talking about the Shepard family, and Shepard did have 2 children. His wife died of pneumonia in 1921. He was widowed at a very young age, relatively speaking, since he was married in 1908. And she died and is buried in her parents' cemetery down in Nashville. To this day, I don't know where Augustus is buried. His daughter, Marie Shepard, came out in society. She was 11 years old when her mom died. She came out in society in 1929. As I said, he maintained a house in New York City, but all through the 30s and 40s, he had dual addresses: Adirondack League Club, Old Forge, New York, and New York City. This is a photograph of the daughter, Marie Shepard. Actually, they called her by her middle name, Beatrice. She was widowed fairly young. She married again, was divorced from that gentleman. She died in Florida. She had a daughter, Sandra, and I've met several people on the tour today who know her daughter. Sandra, from what I understand, had at least 3 husbands. Ted thinks she had 4. But she was a member of the club up to about 1990, and she was a guest here not long ago of your family? In the 80s. Okay. And she maintained a membership here, Sandra did. I can't tell you what her last name was. Well, yeah. Well, anyway, she and her husband had property, and maybe still do, over in Bolton Landing, but she's still alive. And she has 1 son, who's a friend of your son.
And then a daughter, Winifred, she's living in the center.
Okay.